The moment my husband told me he regretted marrying me, I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't even breathe. I simply sat there, staring across the dinner table at the man I'd loved for 12 years, waiting for him to laugh and tell me this was some horrible joke. He never did. The words hung in the air between us like smoke. I was wrong to marry you. Even now, when I replay that night in my mind, I remember the exact sound of the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking behind us. I remember the smell of roasted garlic and rosemary from the dinner I'd spent 2 hours preparing. I remember the candlelight reflecting off Ethan's wine glass, and I remember realizing, with terrifying clarity, that the man sitting across from me had already left our marriage long before he said those words aloud. My name is Claire, and until that Tuesday evening, I believed I had a good life. Not a perfect one. I wasn't naive enough to think perfect marriages existed. But Ethan and I had built something real together. We owned a beautiful house in the suburbs. We had successful careers. We traveled every summer, celebrated every anniversary, and spent countless nights talking about the future we planned to grow old inside. At least, I thought we did. Looking back now, I can see all the signs I ignored. The late nights at work, the phone that was suddenly always face down, the way Ethan had stopped reaching for my hand when we watched television, the way he smiled at messages he never showed me. At the time, I explained everything away. Everyone goes through stressful periods. That's what I told myself. That's what my friends told me. Claire, you're overthinking. He adores you. Men get distant when they're stressed. Maybe they believed that. Maybe I needed to believe it more. Because admitting the truth would have meant admitting that the life I'd built was already collapsing around me. That Tuesday started like every other day. I left work around 5. I stopped at the grocery store and bought Ethan's favorite ingredients: roasted chicken with garlic potatoes, homemade chocolate mousse for dessert. I even bought a bottle of the red wine we drank on our anniversary. I thought I was planning a romantic evening. Instead, I was preparing my own execution. Ethan arrived home just after 7. The first thing I noticed was how tired he looked. The second thing I noticed was that he didn't kiss me. He hadn't kissed me hello in weeks. "Something smells good," he said quietly. I smiled. "I made your favorite." He nodded. "Thanks." That was it. No smile, no affection, no warmth. We ate mostly in silence. The entire evening felt strange, formal, like two coworkers attending an uncomfortable business meeting instead of a husband and wife sharing dinner. Ethan barely touched his food. He kept staring at his glass. I kept waiting for him to explain what was wrong. Finally, he placed his fork down. "Claire," he said. My stomach tightened immediately. No good conversation in a marriage ever begins with someone saying your name that way. "What's wrong?" I asked. He looked directly at me. For a second, I saw something in his eyes. Not sadness. Not guilt. Relief. "I've been thinking about this for a long time." The room suddenly felt smaller. "Thinking about what?" He exhaled slowly. "Us." I forced a smile. "Okay," then he said the sentence that destroyed everything. "I was wrong to marry you." I stared at him. I waited for the punchline. There wasn't one. "Ethan," I whispered, "I don't want this marriage anymore." The world didn't shatter dramatically. It simply stopped. The clock stopped ticking. The refrigerator stopped humming. Even my own heartbeat seemed to disappear. "Where is this coming from?" I finally asked. He shook his head. "It doesn't matter. It absolutely matters." "No," he said calmly, "I've already made my decision." Then, without breaking eye contact, he slipped his wedding ring off his finger. He placed it on the table. The sound of metal striking wood echoed through the room. And then he looked at me and said something even worse. "Give me yours." The request didn't make sense. For several seconds, I simply stared at Ethan's hand resting beside his wedding ring. I kept expecting him to pull it back, to tell me this was anger speaking, exhaustion speaking, anything except the truth. "What?" I whispered. "The ring," he repeated. His voice remained calm, controlled, almost rehearsed. "Give it to me." My hands began trembling. "Ethan, please, talk to me. We can fix whatever this is." He leaned back in his chair and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. There was no anger in his face, no sadness, no hesitation, only certainty. "There is nothing to fix." The words hurt more than I thought possible. For 12 years, I had believed that marriage meant choosing each other, even during the difficult seasons. We had survived layoffs, illnesses, family arguments, financial stress, and countless ordinary disappointments. I thought surviving hardship together meant something. Apparently, I had survived alone. I looked down at the gold band on my finger. I remembered the day Ethan had slipped it onto my hand. The way his voice shook when he said his vows. The way he smiled afterward as if he'd just won the lottery. Had that man ever really existed? "Please," I said quietly, "just tell me why." He rubbed his jaw. "I don't love you anymore." No explanation, no apology, just a sentence delivered with the emotional weight of a weather report. I felt tears burning behind my eyes. "Since when?" "It doesn't matter." "How long, Ethan?" He looked away. That silence was an answer all by itself. Slowly, I removed the ring. My fingers resisted, as though even my body refused to believe what was happening. When the ring finally slid free, I held it in my palm for several seconds. Then I placed it beside his. The sound it made against the table seemed impossibly loud. For one brief moment, I thought I saw regret flash across his face. I was wrong. "Pack your things," he said. I blinked. "What? You need to leave tonight." I laughed, not because anything was funny, because the alternative was collapsing. "This is our house." He met my eyes. "No, it's my house." The words landed with brutal precision. The house had belonged to Ethan's family long before we married. Legally, he was right. Emotionally, he had just erased 12 years of memories with a single sentence. I stood slowly. "You want me to leave tonight?" "Yes. Where am I supposed to go?" "I don't know." That hurt more than everything else. Not because he wanted me gone. Because he genuinely didn't care where I ended up afterward. I walked upstairs in a daze. The bedroom looked exactly as it had that morning. Our photographs still sat on the dresser. His clothes hung beside mine in the closet. Our anniversary picture remained on the nightstand. Evidence of a marriage that apparently existed only for one of us. I packed 2 suitcases. Ethan never followed me upstairs. He never asked if I needed help. He never changed his mind. An hour later, I carried my bags to the front door. He was standing in the kitchen when I left. "Claire," I stopped. For one impossible second, hope returned. "I'm sorry," he said. Not sorry for what he had done, sorry that he had to do it. I nodded because I no longer trusted myself to speak. Then I walked out. I checked into a small hotel across town shortly before midnight. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed and replayed every moment of our marriage, searching for the exact point where love had died and I had somehow failed to notice. I also remembered something else. 3 weeks earlier, I had asked Ethan if he was happy. He had smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "Of course." Sitting alone in that hotel room, I finally understood that sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones spoken gently. I wished I listened sooner to myself. At sunrise, while unpacking my suitcase, I realized something terrifying. I had left the locked family box behind. And I suddenly knew I had to go back. The drive back to the house felt unreal. Less than 12 hours earlier, I had left that same driveway believing my marriage had ended. Now, as the morning sun illuminated the familiar streets of our neighborhood, I couldn't shake the feeling that something even worse was waiting for me. I kept telling myself I was being dramatic. I was going back for a locked box containing family photographs, old letters, and important documents. I would retrieve it, avoid Ethan if possible, and leave. That was all. But the moment I pulled into the driveway, I knew something was wrong. There was another car parked in front of the house. A silver sedan. Not a neighbor's. Not a visitor's. A car I had never seen before. I sat in my own car for nearly a minute, staring at it. My heart began beating faster. Then I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. There had to be. I walked to the front door with my keys in my hand. The house looked exactly as it always had. The flower pots near the entrance, the wind chimes on the porch, the small crack in the second step that Ethan had promised to repair for years. Nothing had changed. And yet everything had. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. At first, all I heard was silence. Then came laughter. A woman's laughter. Soft, comfortable, intimate, not the laughter of someone visiting. The laughter of someone who felt at home. My entire body froze. The sound came from the living room. I should have turned around. I should have left. Instead, I walked forward. One step. Then, another. The closer I got, the more certain I became that whatever waited around that corner would destroy the last pieces of denial I still carried. Then I saw her. She was sitting on my couch. My couch. She held a coffee mug in both hands and wore one of Ethan's oversized gray sweatshirts. Her hair was still slightly messy, as though she had just woken up. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. She looked at me. I looked at her. Then Ethan stood up. His expression wasn't guilt. It wasn't shame. It was annoyance. "You weren't supposed to come back," he said. The sentence hit harder than finding another woman in my house. Because somehow, in his mind, the problem wasn't what he'd done. The problem was that I had seen it. "I forgot something," I said quietly. The woman immediately placed her mug on the table. She looked uncomfortable, embarrassed, young, far younger than I had expected. Ethan folded his arms. "It's not what you think." I looked around the room. The overnight bag near the staircase, the extra shoes by the front door, the phone charger plugged into the wall beside Ethan's chair. Then I looked back at him. "It's exactly what I think." Silence, heavy, unavoidable, the woman stood slowly. "I should go," she said. Ethan nodded. He didn't ask her to stay. He didn't introduce us. He didn't even pretend there was another explanation. She grabbed her purse and hurried toward the door. As she passed me, she kept her eyes on the floor. I wondered if she knew who I was. I wondered if she knew she was walking through the remains of someone else's life. The front door closed, and suddenly, it was just us. 12 years of marriage standing in a room that no longer belonged to either of us. "How long?" I asked. Ethan looked away. "A few months." I laughed, not because I believed him, because I knew immediately that he was lying. "How long?" He rubbed his forehead. "Longer, how much longer?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth was already sitting in every corner of that room. The late nights, the secret messages, the business trips, the distance, the lies. While I had spent the past year trying to save our marriage, Ethan had already replaced it. Then my eyes drifted toward the kitchen counter. A stack of folders sat there, organized, labeled, prepared. And in that exact moment, I realized something that frightened me even more than the affair. This hadn't been a spontaneous betrayal. This had been a plan. I walked toward the kitchen counter before Ethan could stop me. For the first time since I had walked back into the house, I saw something crack in his expression. Fear. Not fear that he had hurt me. Not fear that I knew about the affair. Fear that I was about to discover something he had worked very hard to keep hidden. "Claire," he said sharply. "Don't." I ignored him. My hands were shaking as I reached for the top folder. Property records. I frowned. The second folder contained financial statements. The third held printed emails, notes, account summaries, and legal documents. I slowly opened another folder. Then another. And another. With every page I turned, the truth became more horrifying. This hadn't started a few months ago. It hadn't even started when he met the other woman. Ethan had been preparing to leave me for nearly a year. There were consultations with attorneys, lists of assets, property evaluations, copies of bank records, notes about timing, even handwritten reminders. I stopped breathing when I saw one sentence highlighted in yellow: "Wait until after final property transfer." I looked up at him. "You planned all of this?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The evidence was spread across the counter between us. While I was planning anniversary trips, he had been planning my exit. While I was trying to understand why he seemed distant, he had been calculating the most convenient way to erase me from his future. And somehow, the affair hurt less than that realization. Because affairs can happen in moments of weakness. This wasn't weakness. This was strategy. I pulled out my phone. "What are you doing?" Ethan asked. I began taking photographs. Every page. Every document. Every note. "Claire, stop," I continued. "You don't need those." I looked directly at him. "I think I do." For the first time in 12 years, Ethan looked uncertain. The confident man who had demanded my wedding ring the night before suddenly looked nervous. "Good. I photographed everything." When I finished, I placed the folders exactly where I had found them. Then I walked upstairs, not because I wanted to stay, because I suddenly realized there were probably other things I didn't know. The bedroom looked unchanged. Our bed was still made. My perfume remained on the dresser. Our wedding photograph still sat beside Ethan's side of the bed. I picked it up. We looked so happy. Not perfect, but real. Or at least, I had believed it was real. I placed the photograph back where it belonged. Then I opened Ethan's desk drawer. Inside, I found hotel receipts, cards, receipts from restaurants we had never visited together, and one folded piece of paper. A handwritten note. Not from me. I shouldn't have read it. I did anyway. The handwriting was feminine. The message was simple. "I can't wait until we don't have to hide anymore." There was no signature. There didn't need to be. I folded the paper carefully and returned it to the drawer, not because I wanted to protect Ethan, because I suddenly felt exhausted. Deeply, completely exhausted, I walked back downstairs carrying the locked family box I'd come for. Ethan was standing exactly where I had left him. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he surprised me. "I didn't want to hurt you." I stared at him. The sentence was so absurd that I almost smiled. "You spent a year planning how to leave me." He looked away. "I was trying to make things easier." Easier for who? He didn't answer. Because we both knew. Easier for him. I walked toward the front door. "Claire," I stopped. "I'm sorry." This time I believed he meant it, not because he regretted betraying me, not because he regretted losing me. Because for the first time, he realized there might be consequences. And as I opened the front door, I realized something too. I wasn't walking away defeated. I was walking away with the truth. And the truth was about to destroy everything Ethan had spent a year trying to protect. The first person I called was a lawyer. Not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted money. Because after everything I had discovered, I no longer trusted a single word Ethan had ever said to me. The consultation lasted nearly 2 hours. I showed the attorney every photograph I had taken from the folders in the kitchen. I explained the affair, the hidden planning, the sudden demand that I leave the house. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said something that changed everything. "You did the right thing by documenting this." For the first time since Ethan had ended our marriage, I felt something I hadn't experienced in days. Relief, not because my life was improving. Because I finally understood that I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined the distance. I hadn't exaggerated the betrayal. And I certainly hadn't deserved what had happened. Over the next several weeks, more truth surfaced than I thought possible. Friends started calling. Family members started asking questions. Apparently, Ethan had been telling people a very different version of our marriage. According to him, we had grown apart years ago. According to him, we had mutually decided to separate. According to him, there had been no affair. The problem with carefully constructed lies is that they require everyone else to remain silent. I didn't. I never screamed. I never sought revenge. I simply told the truth. The timeline, the documents, the planning. The woman in my living room, wearing his sweatshirt less than 12 hours after he had thrown me out of our marriage. People drew their own conclusions. And those conclusions weren't kind to Ethan. Friends stopped returning his calls. Family members demanded explanations. People who had once admired him suddenly began questioning everything they thought they knew. I heard rumors that his relationship with the other woman became strained almost immediately. Apparently, real life felt very different once secrecy disappeared. I didn't celebrate any of it. There was nothing satisfying about watching someone destroy themselves. Mostly, I was just tired. So I focused on myself. I found a small apartment with large windows and a tiny balcony. I returned to work. I started therapy. I learned how to sleep alone. I learned how to grocery shop for one person. I learned how to stop checking my phone every few minutes, expecting messages that would never come. Some days were unbearable. Some days I couldn't get out of bed. Some days I cried in the shower because it was the only place quiet enough to fall apart. But slowly, almost invisibly, things began changing. I laughed again. I slept through the night. I stopped replaying our last dinner conversation. And eventually, I stopped asking myself the question that had haunted me from the beginning. Why wasn't I enough? Because the truth was, Ethan's betrayal had never been about my value. It had been about his character. Almost a year after I left that house, I found our wedding ring in the back of a drawer. Not his, mine. I had forgotten that after giving it back at the dinner table, I had purchased a simple replacement band years earlier when the original was being repaired. I held it in my hand for a long time. Then I smiled. Not because I missed him, because I realized I no longer did. The man who demanded his ring back believed he was taking everything from me. My marriage, my home, my future. But he was wrong. When I walked out of that house, I lost someone who had stopped valuing me long before I understood it. He lost someone who had loved him completely. And in the end, only one of us recovered from that loss. It wasn't Ethan. It was me.